Hello, everyone. Hey, welcome to the next Founders Live conversations. I am Nick Hughes. I'm the founder and CEO of Founders Live. And, with all these conversations, we love to bring on not only like new guests, but also return guests to our interview series. And today I have Thane Ringler. He is joining us from Denver, Colorado. Yes?
Correct. Got it.
Thane, what's up? Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate being back with you here. We've gotten to share some good conversations in the past, and I have no doubt this will be another good one.
Absolutely. And hey, I'm joining in from London, England, here in the UK, and I'm currently on my Europe tour, 4.5 month tour through Europe, and about 2/3 of the way in, and I still got another 6 weeks, so it's pretty exciting and able to, still do these conversations and all that. And Thane, before we get into, the topic that we're really going to hit and touch on today is really like emotional intelligence, communication, healthy organizational cultures, and how leaders and leadership is one of our key words here and topics. How leaders can grow and be influential in all of that. And it's going to be an awesome conversation, but would love to just have you give a little bit of background on yourself for those that might not have listened to some of our other interviews.
Yeah, totally. So, high level overview. I come from Kansas. Grew up in a small town in Kansas, Hutchinson. Spent about 10 years in Los Angeles. I moved out there for college. Ended up staying after college. And then a big part of my life growing up and into early adulthood was golf. So I competed in golf for most of my life. Ended up playing professionally for about 4 years after college. Played overseas on the One Asia tour for a season. Played on different developmental tours. Tried to get my way onto the PGA Tour. Never gained status. Never made it to that level. And had some injuries that repeated over a year and a half that led to me transitioning out of the space and into entrepreneurship. I got started with a handful of things as a single dude living in Los Angeles does. Writing, speaking, podcasting like this. Had a small business I started. Yeah, just did a handful of things to kind of figure out like, what is it that I'm good at? What do I like doing? What's a sustainable business I can create? I learned a lot in those years. Ended up transitioning. I met my now wife on a blind date in Denver. Had an event bring me there. And we ended up getting married right when COVID popped, and I moved to a new city, and it was a wild ride. So 2020 was pretty nuts for us, and we're still here. So a handful of years later, still going strong, still in Denver, loving it, and really in that transition, I wanted to double down on what I felt like I was good at, what I cared about making an impact in the world with. And that was leadership development. That was coaching. That was a one-on-one space with individuals and supporting them in their journey. And so I started looking for groups to do that with or companies to partner with. And I came across this group, Giant Worldwide, and their tools and resources felt aligned with what I was trying to do. And so I got certified, started utilizing what they have available and focusing on teams and organizations. So I've been doing that work ever since. Launched my firm this last year, Appello Partners, and just been getting into what it looks like to really do the work consistently over a long period of time and building something that is sustainable, and trying to live life and do a good job at that too. So it's fun being human, very dynamic, and I'm grateful for all pieces of it.
Oh, thanks. It's a great overview. Yeah, thank you. And some of our previous conversations, we talked about more of that past your previous career and what you learned, and even that transition. So if you're listening or you're watching, search Founders Live, and you will be able to find that previous conversation, which is great. Before we really get into the meat here, definitely let's talk about Appello Partners. What do you all really do and represent? Just a little quick overview of that.
Yeah, the word appello is Latin. It means to call to drive towards, or to call up. And that's kind of the heart of the work. We want to call people up to what they're really capable of, who they truly are, living with integrity, being fully aligned. And so that's the heart posture from the work. But we're a leadership development firm. So we work with teams and organizations on how to be effective leaders. What does leadership actually mean? What does it look like? How do we do it well with our people? How do we create a culture of leadership among all tiers of an organization? And so that's what we're all about. It's pretty early on in the firm, but we're building towards just a host of resources and people that can really fight together to do the work well and serve clients well as strategic partners.
Awesome. Awesome. One thing that you have mentioned to me, and I think it might be a fun place to kind of jump off, is you've created this leadership majors. All
Hmm.
right. And I can tell already that, you're this is like me. I'll combine like two kind of random but fun things that I'm absolutely passionate about. And I can tell you've done that. So give us a brief on this vision of the leadership majors.
Yeah. So to your point, I love saying, how can we merge two fields to make them more effective by providing something that's unique that maybe isn't being done? So, with a background in golf, with the game teaching me so much about myself, about life, about yeah, how to lead myself well in moments. I wanted to combine that for others. I wanted to provide others an experience where they can actually think or use golf intentionally to learn about themselves and about things that are helpful beyond the golf course. And so the leadership majors comes from that heart and that idea. And really, it's a creating events and experiences at that intersection of golf and golf improvement. So, getting better at your game, which we all want to, which doesn't mean going to the range and working on your swing, although that can be helpful. Most of the time, what's more helpful is just thinking better on the golf course, using our brains and our strategy a little bit more that most of us aren't being taught. So, on the front end is that golf game improvement. On the back end is applying some of those same tools to our teams, our organizations, or our personal life beyond the golf course.
Oh, that's cool. And so is it an immersed experience over a certain amount of days? Maybe give us a little bit of direction on that.
Yeah, so we offer a few different options. We do half day events, we do full day events, and then we do weekend retreats. So the half day events are like at Top Golf or ranges or simulators where you get a taste. The full day is similar to like a charity golf tournament, but not at all about raising money, more about the intentional experience. And then the weekend retreats are at destinations at really awesome golf courses and really meant to be smaller, more curated, meaningful relationship building time, but also really powerful experiences that will leave a lasting impact.
Awesome. And when should people experience or maybe expect the first ones to kind of hit and they can be a part of it?
Yeah, first one should be rolling out next year, mid 2025. We are doing some private events, so if there's a corporate team or a group that already does golf offsites, we love partnering with them to create some customized solutions and experiences for them. So that's something that we're focusing on this year, and then next year will be our first public major in that sense or experience.
I think it's great. I think when you take basically an immersive experience that brings people outside of their normal function and you really maybe even their comfort zone.
Yeah.
And look, we can even if we like go off into a weekend that we're still in kind of a boardroom and we're sitting there all day with someone at the front of the room telling us about leadership. That's all great and that can be impactful, but I think what we're looking for now is very unique experiences. And when you're pulled out of your comfort zone, I'll tell you right now, as travel and being on a tour like this has been just an amazing and unique experience for me and
Mm,
my leadership, pulling me out of a lot of my normal day-to-day stuff if I'm at home and when I'm in Seattle, which is my hometown. And I've got my own things, but I think what you guys are doing is creating this unique experience that's removed
mm,
and it's in a different environment, probably with people that you don't know before. And so I
yeah.
think that's really cool. I think it's cool, man.
Yeah, no, just to pause on that for a second because I think it's a really valuable point. It's kind of like the same as when we're trying to like really learn something, right? We can read a book, but really we'll forget 99% of what we read. Maybe that one thing will stick. And really, what's helpful is like having spaced exposure to something, time for it to marinate and settle in, REM sleep to like actually, ingrain it in our memory, those kind of things that really solidify it. And so when we are able to kind of be outside of the norm, shocked into seeing something more clearly or having an experience to imprint it more deeply on us, it does settle in a new or different way. And also on the other side, like some people are just allergic to leadership development or coaching or anything like that that's so explicitly that in nature that they need someone to come in the back door and be like, hey, this also applies to leadership. And it may not be as um, uncomfortable or um, frustrating or unfun as you think it is. And so it's fun to think about ways to come in the back door with people too.
I like it. I like it. Good job. Well, we'll keep our eyes out for leadership, the leadership majors, and in 2025, what that brings. So keep us up
Thanks.
to date on that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, one of our main topics here, really, really interesting and very applicable, is emotional intelligence. And as leaders, so now we're diving into really leadership in general, and typically we're looking at IQ, and this person, especially in the tech industry, that's our main industry. Maybe yours, you swim around that a little bit as well, but people look for that intelligence. Well, we're let's talk about emotional intelligence, and maybe the right way to kind of back into this is how do you, and especially with Appello partners, how do you all define even that tangible? Because there's like a definition in a sense, but how do you define emotional intelligence?
It's a great question. There's a lot of ways to go about that, and all of them can be helpful or shining light on different perspectives, but it's a difficult thing to do. One of the things that I think is really helpful is thinking about the idea of like, what is it like to be on the other side of you? And sitting with that question and being like, do I really understand? Am I actually aware of? Am I conscious of what it's like to be on the other side of me in this situation or in this circumstance? And the follow up question to that is, who is on the other side of you? Do you recognize that the person on the other side of you is different than you? Meaning they come from a different place, they care about different things, they were raised and formed in a different way, they may have a different wiring or personality. Just having those two questions to tap in and tune in and just pause and consider can really serve us well in saying, okay, what is it like for Nick to be on the other side of Thane right now? What's his experience of me like from his perspective and not just mine? And then who is Nick? How do I communicate in a way that Nick can understand? How can I speak to something that Nick cares about? How can I build trust with Nick in a way that he cares about and not just the way that I want it to be? And it kind of taps into, I think we're all aware of the golden rule, which says, do unto others as you do unto yourself. We often like to think of the platinum rule, which is do unto others as they would do unto themselves. And it just
Mhm.
highlights again that we're different humans, meaning we have different needs, desires, wants. So how can we see and understand and be aware of those in order to work better together, to build trust together, to be seen and known, which I think are core human needs. And that's a way to start getting into the conversation around emotional intelligence.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. It brings up a couple different thoughts for me for sure. But how does today's world, hyper connected, a lot of tech in our hands, literally like in our fingertips and hands, and pretty soon other very close with us, does it make it more difficult for emotional intelligence, and especially for leadership, or does it make it easier or quicker to achieve certain results? But I guess talk about how technology and social and all this stuff has influenced this.
Yeah, it is an undeniable factor in today's world, right? Um, we could talk for I think a year straight to figure that out. I think a couple things that come to mind for me is I recently was sitting with Blaise Pascal's quote on all of humanity's problems come from man's inability to sit quiet and alone in a room. And I think what's interesting about that quote and technology is that I think it can mask or disguise or hide a lot about ourselves. I think it can distract us from the silence, stillness, and solitude that's needed to really understand. And and I think those can be band-aids over time that really lead to major problems. And so I think there needs to be awareness around that. I think there needs to be discipline around that, and knowing factoring in how our attention is being used and being intentional about that versus accidental is a big requirement, I think, for us to be emotionally intelligent, for us to be self aware, and for us to be healthy and effective leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll even carry that on and just say, I think the word that comes to mind is distraction. We are just distracted in today's world. There's no denying that, and any sort of using your smart your mobile, you're on all the socials and whatever your thing is, and everyone has a thing. Just so you know, um, it distracts us from ourselves, and actually, this wraps into what you were just the quote you're talking about. It is so the wisdom there is so strong, which is sit quiet and be with your thoughts, and kind of that meditation aspect allows for understanding and deep feeling of what's going
Yeah,
on. And I think when you look at technology in today's world, it just basically is a distraction.
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It takes us away from ourselves, and then this comes back to the emotional intelligence. The questions that you posed earlier, if you're scrolling through Instagram or other things, you are not asking those questions,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and you're also comparing, right? So you're comparing based on zero to little context, which usually isn't helpful. And then it also, I think it leads to conclusions, right? We draw a lot of conclusions based on those snap judgment or impressions or observations, and all that shuts down curiosity, right? Very rarely do we get really curious on social media. Most of the time we judge, we have opinions, we either confirm our bias or entrench in our way of thinking. And so it does a lot to harm our curiosity, which is, I think, an essential ingredient to being healthy all throughout our lives, but also to being emotionally intelligent.
Yeah, yeah. Um, how would leaders improve, maybe even identify or be aware of, and then improve their emotional intelligence? And we're going to go into more, some communication and healthy organizational cultures, but just talk about a leader right now. Any suggestions on how they would identify and work to improve their emotional intelligence?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I can give personal example and then an example of a client from yesterday, even. So, for me, one of the things that was big is actually a personality assessment we use called the Five Voices, and there's a lot of great personality assessments out there. None of them are definitive. They can be really helpful lenses to look through and give us more language and understanding of our wiring or tendencies. For the Five Voices, it's based on Myers Briggs, and it frames it in a way that's a little bit more easy to understand. And from that, I really learned that from a communication standpoint, I tend to, when I'm speaking unintentionally or off the cuff, I tend to be all over the place.
Mhm.
And I'm very future oriented. And so that's part of it, these ideas and this future, and I'm making sense of it in real time. And my wife is very present oriented. And so when I do that, it stresses her out because one, it doesn't make any sense. And two, that impacts her current present reality. And what that can lead to is then her shutting down my ideas or critiquing them or saying that doesn't make sense, which then leads to me shutting down and feeling like, well, she doesn't want to understand or take the time to understand. And it doesn't make any sense. And I'm a bad community, all this downward spiral. So it can compound in a negative way. So just by having a little awareness around that, all of a sudden I can start taking ownership for, look, if I want to be helpful to my wife, then I need to take the time to make sense of what I'm saying. And I need to also check in and say, is this the right time to say it? Is this something that's helpful to say? Because I can own all of those pieces. Um, so I think that's a really personal example. And then from a client I worked with yesterday, um, we were talking a lot about the tendency he has to be a perfectionist. And being a perfectionist as a leader means that it's very hard to delegate. And when you do delegate, usually you keep your thumb on it to make sure that the outcome is exactly how you want it, which in effect doesn't allow the other person to grow and develop at all. And so he's having a lot of issues with capacity because over time that adds up to where even if he's trying to delegate, it's not being effective. They're not getting trained and equipped, and he has more and more on his plate and less ability to delegate effectively. And so a lot of what we talk about in that is not about, hey, we need to change our tendency. That takes years. It's hard for us to change that internal wiring, tons of work over a long period of time. What we can change is the actions we take. And so by becoming better aware of our tendencies, we can intercept them before they turn into the unhelpful actions and choose a different action, right? So if we're aware of it in that moment, all of a sudden I can say, okay, I know this is my tendency. I can push pause. I can take a beat. I can consider, is this worth saying right now? Does it need to be said? Or can I just wait? And that allows me to choose a different action, even given the tendency that I have that likely won't change anytime soon.
Yeah. Oh, those two. Those two examples are very powerful and very tangible and relatable, right? And I think we all have our own tendencies. I can identify with the perfectionist in a lot of ways,
Totally.
and just the delegation, and I'm on my own journey with especially Founders Live, man. Like we're doing amazing things around the world. I'm okay saying that, and
Yeah.
it's also like wow, in the fact of learning a lot about where my resistance is,
Hmm.
or like when you hit those kind of ceilings and you're like, oh, huh, that's interesting, and why, and
Hmm.
I have that as well, and it's been a journey to continually let go of things
Hmm.
and know that nothing is perfect. Things are going to break,
Yeah.
and I think that that's part of business.
Totally. Yeah, I'm curious to hear in those times when you feel that head against the ceiling and you're butting up against it. I'm curious what the process looks like for you. How do you work through that or make sense of it?
Nah, first of all, it's like for me, it's just like, okay, something, you feel that, I guess, the pressure on the head, you're hitting the ceiling and you're like, okay, that is breaking. And I've been able to get okay with that even that reality,
Mm,
right? It's okay for things to kind of hit a pause or what I call break. That just means something kind of, and it takes me to like, I think honestly, I think what I do is there's kind of that it's the knee jerk reaction, and then the day later, 3 days later, the like, oh, I see. This is how it needs to kind of. I need to
mm,
relax, hold. But I sometimes I'll have a knee jerk, and that's more just like, like, and look, my unique situation is that, especially as I travel around the world, I'm available, but it's also I'm removed, and I'm in this constant, well, half of the year, I'm traveling. And so I'm in this constant kind of like in this place where, I don't want those things to break. So I'm like, and then a day or two, or, you allow some space.
mm,
Then that's important as a leader because you can't fix everything in immediate. You need to allow that space. And then at times I do, I've got my own coaches, or even just talking with certain people, it's like, ah,
mm,
I see that next move.
mhm,
So I guess to me is it's okay to feel a bit of pain and hit that ceiling. It's okay to see some things kind of, and then this is how we work through the challenges. And if you extrapolate that over weeks, months, and years, that's actually how, I mean, that's growth personally, as well as that's
mm.
growth organizationally.
Totally. Yeah, I love that. Thanks for sharing. And Yeah, it just speaks a lot to, I think just the essence that it really like never ends. It's such a practice, right? It's not like you get to a place and you arrive and all of a sudden this no longer applies. It's like this is always applicable. And we're always going to have an experience of that. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Thanks, thanks. Well, that's kind of shifts into like, healthy organizational cultures, and definitely we're going to get into, leadership through influence and all that. But let's maybe, kind of touch on, um, let's say leaders that then are going through that awareness of their emotional intelligence, and they are kind of they're hitting those ceilings and taking that time to identify things and shift through. What do healthy organizations look and feel like in
Mm.
their culture? And, kind of starting from that leadership aspect.
Yeah. Honestly, it starts with the foundation of communication. So I think a early indication is communication open and free flowing in a helpful way. Not saying it's free flowing like anything goes all the time, but that there's always an openness to the conversation, both up and down the chain of command. Without that foundation, a lot of things become very difficult to do well. And so I think we have to start with communication. We have to start with, are we being effective? Is it open and free flowing? And is it done in a way that supports and empowers and liberates the other, right? How do we not? There's this difference between calling up versus calling out. We talk out about a
Yeah,
lot. It's when something goes wrong, which inevitably things go wrong. How do we go about handling that, right? And as leaders, do we go out about it by calling them out and saying, hey, Nick, why didn't you do this? This was supposed to get done by this. All of a sudden, the environment, the feel of that is it's me against you, and you're wrong. And so I'm right. And you're going to lose and I'm going to win, is the impact of that, even if that's not what we're explicitly saying. Instead, if we understand our people, we understand what they want, if we're working together to give them what they want in the context of what we're trying to do as a group and the direction we're going, then all of a sudden it's like, hey, Nick, I know we were trying to get this out on time, didn't get done. Love to just learn what happened and work through it together to see what we can do better next time. It's a very different impact. All of a sudden, it's not about you being in trouble and me being the one calling you out, but it's me coming alongside and supporting you as a coach would, of saying, hey, how do we work through this together to learn what went wrong so we can learn what to do better next time?
yeah, yeah. And that the words that come to mind is that's rooted in, there's safety. People feel safe to eh, then be vulnerable. I think the when I go back to that knee jerk reaction, I think it at times it there is like a reaction to, like, kind of strike, literally, like, these are violent terms in some ways, but strike out, so that you're like, I am not at fault. Something else is happening. It could be to someone or it could be something.
Hmm.
Versus, kind of taking that time and actually recognizing, oh, this is a there's some trust here, and
Hmm.
we can all be vulnerable, and we're just in what you mentioned is like removing that person of accusation and kind of putting the issue up here, right?
Hmm.
So calling up and saying, this is a situation, uh, what happened and how can we improve it next time,
Yep.
versus like, you did this. and
Right.
and so I think it's an environment of trust.
Yeah.
It's an environment of respect. Those are the things, those are the words that are coming to me.
Yeah. Yeah, and we use this tool called the support challenge matrix, and I think it's one of the most helpful depictions of how leaders can calibrate what they bring to their people. Typically, anything that we do or work towards with someone is a version of support or a version of challenge. So it can fall into one of those two buckets. Support is like, hey, do you need any help with that? Can I help teach you this? Can I take that off your plate? Can we reschedule? Like a lot of those things. Challenge is giving someone a challenging task, holding them to accountability regardless of circumstance. A lot of those elements are what you consider challenge. And so, as a leader, the goal is to calibrate both high support and high challenge so that people are liberated or called up to their full potential, is kind of the idea. given our personality differences, people will tend to fall on one side or the other. So typically, if we don't intentionally choose, we'll accidentally slide into giving a ton of support and not enough challenge, like the client I was mentioning, right? Perfectionist tendencies means that he gives all this support, but he's not challenging them to stretch into things that are hard and learn and do the hard yards of actually ingraining a new skill. And that ends up creating a protective culture where entitlement and mistrust are very common, because all of a sudden it's like, well, Nick keeps checking in with me and watching what I'm doing, and then he like corrects all this stuff. Maybe he doesn't think I'm actually capable of doing this, right? Or it's, if I can't figure it out, Nick will just do it for me, and that's okay, right? And neither
Yeah.
of those are helpful. And so
Yeah.
how do we get more challenge into that equation so that we get more of an empowerment culture, where people are really bringing their best? On the other side of it, right? Like, if you start leading through authority, there can be that fear and manipulation of always bringing this challenge, always calling people out, always looking out for your own self. And that creates a really dominating type culture. And so it's easy to see how it can fall on one side or the other. And honestly, it's just a simple tool to help us calibrate, like, how am I showing up for my people today? How am I showing up for myself today? And what
Yeah.
do I need to maybe calibrate a little bit more of in how I show up?
Yeah. Oh, this is one of the crux of leadership for sure. And I'm going to take this kind of an interesting route just because it's personal to me. As I work with my coach, we actually talk about this a lot around. It's kind of the like 90-10 benevolent versus actual like dictator, right?
Mm,
And this is something that I've learned significantly with Founders Live. Um, there are times where you need to be a bit sharp,
mhm,
and I think this can be uncomfortable for certain people in leadership, right? And leadership is something that clearly, as you're pointing out, it's having this emotional intelligence and having calling up versus calling people out, and that aggressiveness is and not great and all of that. But there's certain times where, as a leader, I need the organization to understand where that line is,
mhm,
right? And I'm curious your thoughts on that aspect of, there's certain times when your voice needs to be raised.
mhm,
Um, but we only have a certain amount of cards to play on that, right? That's
mhm,
like leadership really is that bank of, are you building that bank account up of, mutual respect and trustworthy environment in that culture to be able to kind of go back and forth. But when needed, there is those cards that need to be played.
mhm,
What are your thoughts on that, of kind of like the 10% of like, because they need to know, who is the leader at times, and or like where there's a
mm,
line there, because if not, chaos breaks out. There's
yeah,
no real organizational function. What are your thoughts there?
I love it. I think you're hitting a really good point, and, um, I think the first thing to tie in what we said before is everyone's different, right? Some people actually really like that, and some people are very averse to that, right? So part of it is understanding who's on the other side of me again, and what's their capacity for that. Is that their preference or not? The next side of it is to say, um, kind of tying in that leadership through influence versus authority paradigm of saying, if all I do is that, then that's leading through authority. And over time, that won't work well, because people don't want to just follow people because they said so. They want to follow people because they actually care about them and there's
Yeah.
trust built with them, right? And so if we want to build long lasting relationships, and areas of influence within our team and our people, we can't only do that, to your point, right? It can be used, but in a way that doesn't break trust, I think, is the key element there. And honestly, sometimes we'll step over the line. We have to know where to know where the line is. Sometimes we have to step over it, right?
Yeah.
And so the cool thing about that is, when we do, if we apologize, the big is if we say, hey, look, I stepped over the line, I'm sorry, that actually builds more trust with people than not stepping over in the first place. Because, hey, you're human, you make mistakes too, just like me. and that's okay. I can forgive you, or I can, we can move past that together. And actually, trust can be reinforced sometimes by doing that versus never doing it in the first place.
Yeah. Another aspect of this that, is definitely prevalent in my world is all of this, and now we're going back to the quality communication. All of these things can just happen written in email
Mm, yeah,
or text. And good lord, like that's where things break down,
yeah.
right? And what are your suggestions for leaders, and to have this awareness, especially when look, we're leading our teams, we're doing this, we're replying on email, whether it's on our device, like our phone, or on the computer, and we get that email, might get a little heated. You want to send a response, and talk to us about how you view this aspect of, when to play those cards and when not, and especially what mode of
Mm.
quality communication are we talking about here?
Yeah. Yeah, it's so important. I love that you brought that up, Nick. The medium you use is essential, especially when we're bringing challenge, right? If we think about support, right, we can do that in any of those. Great job on this. I saw this thing you did, like the celebration, the acknowledgement, the encouragement. All of those are going to be helpful. So it doesn't matter as much like which medium you're using. When it comes to the challenge, the hard conversations, the calling up conversations, the firmness of leadership that we need sometimes, those are almost always best done in person. Second best would be a video call, right? And then phone call, and then email, and then text at the very bottom of the list. And so, how do we just become really disciplined and good as leaders at not falling prey to the instinctive reactive response through a text or an email thread that's just going to add fuel to the flame and ultimately hurt our influence and our ability to lead our people effectively? It is our responsibility, it's our obligation to have some discipline and some intention in what we communicate and why, right? And so a lot of times it just means, right, like, sure, you can type out a response, but don't send it in the first hour, or wait 15 minutes, or go on a walk. There's a lot of things we can do to shift our energy and perspective, and it's finding out what's the tool and the mechanism that works best for me, and how do I get really good at not breaking that boundary for myself.
Oh, and in today's world of, if you're using Slack or Teams, which, by the way, side note, I try not to, and that's not necessarily something we lean on too much in our organizations for these exact reasons.
Mm.
Okay, um, but I'm sure people listening, watching, they're very much using some sort of communication system like that. When we talk about leadership and emotional intelligence, communications, and then we're talking about these tools, okay, or email. And obviously, most teams are using email in some way, shape, or form to get things done. They're probably not meeting in person as much as 20, 50 years ago when you think about actually the norm. With all that being said, man, yeah, like if someone's listening here and they're like, yeah, we're a distributed team, we lean on Slack or Teams like massively. And those things, it can kind of devolve, and it can go south.
Yeah.
And these are teammates, co-founders, um,
Hmm.
CEO, COO, investor. What are some quick tips on, if you I mean, these are tools that some teams actually, it's like required and or
Yeah.
like it's essential.
Yeah.
um, you mentioned like stepping away and all that, but any other tips on, geez, how to influence and lead when you're using these methods and modes of communication that can go south really quickly?
Yeah, I think checking assumptions is really big. So, when it comes to simple text type communication, right, like messaging or email, where it's just words, the more that we can eliminate assumptions that come from it on our receiving part, the better. And so, it's not meant to be interpreted. If the person sending it is intending for it to be interpreted, that is their thing to deal with, not yours, right? And so it's our responsibility to say, I'm going to take this at face value and operate off of that as the communication. If it feels confusing or if I don't understand, then we can follow up with question to clarify, or we can hop on a call or a video call, right? Just as easy as it is to send a Slack, we can say, hey, let's hop on a quick Zoom, send them a link, and get on for 5 minutes. All of a sudden, like, I get to know this conversation and Nick so much better than if we were texting this whole time. I'd be like, it'd be a boring conversation because it's not meant to be like this. It's not meant to be engaging, right? And so I think that the easiest solution for distributed teams is to eliminate as many of assumptions as possible, try to be as clear in communication as possible when we're giving it. And then when there's a lack of clarity or a misunderstanding, how do we use video calls to help solve that sooner rather than later?
That's so great. Yeah. Yeah. If you're listening or you're watching here, these absolutely, if you're a leader and you're leading down into an organization, or you're leading up as well and you're working with others, these things will literally save company. Why? Because look, if you're an early stage company, it's just you and it's 3 co-founders total, and you're having these sort of miscommunications, the whole thing could unravel pretty quickly if you don't actually understand how to communicate in a quality way, in a trusted, open manner with the technologies we have today. So this is actually is fatal at times for early stage companies and founders.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. It's like if you're working on developing a good golf game and you haven't really done the reps to nail like 3-foot putts, you get into a tournament and all of a sudden like you can't score because you can't finish out a hole when you get nearby it, right? It's like the fundamentals, it's like the things that you have to do well in order to succeed. And what we're talking about, what you just said, Nick, is so true. Like you have to do this well if it's going to succeed. When you add pressure and your company grows and there's more people involved with it, these fundamentals become that much more essential. And the weaker that they are, the quicker it'll break.
Yeah, thanks for putting it in that. Hey, I sports context, and I think that's really helpful. If you're not a sports fan, everyone, it's okay. But I think that, man, that just the fundamentals, right? It's like, hey, you've worked so hard to get so close to that hole, and now you just can't put touch the ball into the hole or
Yeah.
whatever you want to think. But yeah, if these are the fundamentals that when push comes to shove, maybe that's not the right terminology, but when things do get to a place where it is critical to communicate with a teammate, things can happen. I will share a quick personal story before we're
Yeah.
done here. This happened recently. I will not use names, simply for here's the lesson is, an actual in a teammate of Founders Live, we had a breakdown of this communication, and this individual, very important to Founders Live, to a lot of the things that we're doing, specific things directionally, and they have their tendencies of how they will come at a conversation as well, and it is via text typically. And we had a breakdown to the point where this individual chose to essentially um, not continue with the project in the moment, and they were very important to
Mhm.
this project for Founders Live, and I lost them or we lost them for a period of time. They're now back, and we simply had to talk about it, like literally, like we let the kind of things blow over. The big event that we had in the project passed, and we got through it, and it was fine. And then I was able to, kind of chat with this individual and clear the air, and receive feedback from them, as well as me providing feedback to them. And we finally were able to, but we didn't in the moment. And like, I kind of go back, and it's like, I know. So leading up to it, I could have handled some things a bit differently.
Hmm.
We were on a time crunch. Okay. And so that time crunch kind of shifted me into a bit more of the authoritarian situation. That's actually what the individual had a problem with. Yet, then their choice of communication was like through text, and it was just like some of those like messages were not being read accurately. And as you mentioned earlier, it's like the face value and or can we just get a clarity on this real quick?
Mm.
So the point that I'm illustrating is we actually had, I mean, it could have been very fatal, but it was in the moment. They were like, "Hey, I'm done. I'm out. I can't do this anymore." And I was like, "Wow." And that really helped me kind of see in the mirror, okay, I need to have stronger emotional intelligence on this, you know? I need to view these communication experiences much deeper and understand the mode that we're using, the
Mm.
actual like, hey, I hear you, but can we literally we need to get on a video call like
Mm. Yeah.
um, can we do that so we can talk through this real quick? I'm
Hmm.
requesting that. You know, these are the things that, but it was just like, no, fine.
Yeah, totally.
You
Totally.
know, and that is, you know, so I share that for everyone is like, look, we all go through it. And, you know, thankfully, this individual is back in the picture
Mm.
and on the team. And we're working towards our next big event in this direction. So it's great. But I want to share that because I think these are real.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really great to hear you share that, Nick. And yeah, I think it's important to know like we all um, have work to do in this. I am with you and everyone else listening. I get to support people in it. That doesn't mean I'm immune to it. And I think it's important to remember too that we're 50% of every relationship we're a part of. And so, how do we take ownership of our 50%? How do we focus on what's fully within our control, which is at 50%, and then work on influencing the other 50% in a helpful way? I think if we just keep it simple and focus on that, there'll be a lot more fruit and clarity and direction in the way we show up as leaders.
Yeah. Well, Thane, geez, we're kind of hitting the end of the hour here that we do need to close up, and of course we can and probably will continue. This is always a great conversation with you, and so thank you, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Nick. Yeah, it's always a joy just to discuss and get into it a bit with you. It's a fun time.
Sweet. Hey, so everyone, if you are listening, it's appellopartners.com, and you can reach out and be able to find Thane there and his team, and you'll be able to learn more about what they do. And feel free to reach out to them and ask any questions. So, all right. Well, hey Thane, thanks so much. It was so great. You know, this is Founders Live Conversations, and for everyone. That's it for today. Look for the next conversation here soon. And hey, have a great day. And Thane, last word.
Thanks so much for having me, Nick. Yeah, just I think the last word is call up, not out.
Ah, there you go. All right. See y'all.